willing to pay, and so that gives you your value. Or the circularity in the argument, are you actually, or should you actually be measuring your value as an input? Are you one in that inside box of the Treasury Living Standards in terms of social capital? The outcome or the output is social infrastructure, but you are also looking after the wealth, the inputs that is going to be used for tomorrow and so on. Economists are actually quite comfortable with that about the circularity in the argument because we have something called an input-output model. It's really quite simple. Like, where's an example? A log, logs, wood. It's the output of the forestry industry, but it's the input of the building industry. Simple? It's really, think of it. So what are you valuing? Do you value the log as an output of the forestry or its use as a building? Similarly, think about it. Don't be driven into one box. The economy is a sophisticated organism, and so are your businesses, so is your value. What have I got? I've got a picture. Oh, there's a picture. I'll scoot through this because this is boring and dull. I'll just go to the last couple of slides because I like pictures sometimes. Remember, I'll cut it off here. Remember, price need not be in dollars, and similarly, value for money need not be in dollars. There are all different dimensions. It's probably a bit much to ask you to engage in the language of an economist, and I'm not asking you to, but I am asking you to engage in the concepts and the dimensions that other policy advisors are thinking about and actually encourage them to broaden their horizons. Give them justification to actually go beyond the GDP measure. And let's be open and courageous and not apologetic about our contributions, not just to GDP, but to social infrastructure and to sustainability for the future and so on. Last slide. Everybody loves triangles or circles or squares or something. There are some pictures. Creating value. Yes, you're creating services for other people to enjoy, or communities to enjoy, or your own communities or your own people. Yes, we need to invest for the future. Investment is the economist jargon for using some of the resources, not for today, but for tomorrow. And, of course, it's all got to do with community. We're not a bunch of individuals, despite what the first 36 chapters of the textbook tell me. Price may be value, and value may be price, but it can also be the price of a group of people, what a group of people are prepared to give up, and a community. And don't forget, that group of people means tomorrow's community, not just today's, because they have as much right to be involved in the decision making as they have today. You put all of those three together, and with a bit of luck, we not only end up with wealth, but the arrows go in both directions. We start off with wealth, or we create wealth, or we use wealth. I'll leave that with you. Gone round in a few circles. No apologies. I know this is a scary world that you are in, because I know the pressures on local councils. I know the pressures driven from ratepayers. So they say, well, what do I get for this dollar that I invest in your enterprise? Yes, let's start the argument about what you get for that dollar, but don't be driven into believing that you have to respond in the context of, well, you'll get $1.10 back. It's got to be much broader than that, because that is your contribution to not just individuals, but to the community and to the nation, and not just today, but also for tomorrow and beyond. Kia ora koutou.
Thank you so much. That was inspiring and in quite a dense way. But I mean, I certainly, it is Friday morning and it was quite a late night last night, but I think, what was it? Externalities? Well, that was a weird one. GDP, I mean, we all have our feelings around what GDP mean. I did like your self-description, though. Let me think, what is it? The pinko liberal socialist economist. But thinking about what the Treasury have set up with the framework, thinking about that in a sense of they've put it out there, do you know how they're applying that?
Short answer, no. I'm not privy to the insights of Treasury thinking, unfortunately. But I do know that in terms of the people behind this framework, I do know that it's genuine. Treasury is still grappling with, and so as you are, as we all are, about how to measure improvements. How do we measure improvements in social infrastructure? And I think the question is probably not for that we need improvement, we have to have continual improvement, but also we need to measure it so that we are sure that what we're doing is not actually making us go backwards, not actually worsening the situation. So are they applying it? I think at the moment it's still in development mode, but they've got out there but they are trailing it around many government departments to embed in their thinking and in their policy advice a much broader perspective rather than just GDP. And yes, I know it's Friday, but you've all been out for your morning run, so you should all be clear by now.
True. Living in Wellington, I suppose I see the Lambton Quay and the terrace suits all going to work. And one of the things that interests me personally is the youth that are in those positions. Do you think that makes a difference in the sense of, so I'm thinking about Treasury, so often they're young graduates, it's their first job, and they're making quite major decisions, or at least inputting into those major decisions. Government's the outputter, I suppose, in the context of economics. How do you think that influences what is eventually policy? The youth that are making quite severe and critical decisions for our economy, they don't have what I think you were talking about earlier, the life experience type things.
That gets scarier and scarier as you get older and older, but that's the reality of the world, though. I mean, the young are always going to be here. I think the youth, I don't see a significant difference over the past few years in terms of that influence. I think, we can all go sociological about the young generation and how they don't value things and have had everything on a plate. I don't buy that. I think the critical element in that, and that's in your observation, and I think that goes beyond Treasury and it goes beyond the public sector. It's to business with a small b rather than a big B. And when I mean small b, I mean all organisations, whether they be not-for-profit or for-profit or community orgs or voluntary organisations. They're all businesses in my perspective. They're all people getting together to use resources to make things better. That's what a business is. That critical in all businesses is that nurturing of experiences, that nurturing of knowledge, and in the business jargon is succession planning. That's critical for all businesses with a small b, is succession planning, so that the youth, if you want to call it like that, are not only mentored but have got the older's wisdom looking over them to make sure they're not doing silly stuff, but also do have that wisdom passed down, all those life experiences. I think in terms of the Treasury perspective and in terms of the economics profession, I'll just throw in quite clearly or quite critically, the last few years, and it's a very well kept secret within the economics profession, but the last few years has been quite catastrophic for economists. They've actually had to start think quite critically about how their world has changed. They will never admit it outside the world. They will never admit it outside their four walls because they're still stuck in their comfort zone. They haven't been dragged kicking and screaming. I'm surprised they haven't. But within the economics profession is quite a feeling of, well, I won't say desperation, but a realisation that their models of the world that they've been wedded to for the past few years had fallen apart. And yes, there's a lot of navel gazing. It doesn't show through in the policy advice they're sending through, but there is still a lot of critical thinking within it, and our own Treasury is contributing to that. So the world has changed, and the world will continue changing, and with a bit of luck, the wisdom of past years as well as the youth of the new years will generate some new thinking.
Yep, I'll throw it open now. Pam.
In 2002, the Local Authority Act had social and cultural wellbeing
Wellbeing,
as
yeah.
a key element of what local authorities had to consider. And they've just, last year they reversed that, but it's quite interesting that you're saying that Treasury are now saying, put that back in. How soon do you see that, moving back into local authority?
Yeah, it is very confusing, and I think it's a confusing between the policy advice and the political decisions, without getting too political about it. Basically, you've got a scrap at the moment between central government and local government. And what the prime driver for that change in legislation, in my opinion, was that central government was trying to rein in local government and bring it under its thumb. So that central government was more able to control local government. And so in that context, your argument is with your argument now becomes an argument with central government rather than local government. That's a worry because your funders are local government, so you're 2 steps removed from that argument. Will it come back? It may or may not come back explicitly, but the underlying currents are still through there. Local government, the officials and many of the local government politicians are still well aware that they can't limit themselves to economic well-being or economic outcomes because they understand the arguments. But they are then also fighting a battle with central government. Many of the local government politicians, they still live by the 4 well-beings because it's their world. They have to respond to communities. They're beholden to communities or ratepayers, and it's only a small subset of ratepayers that are driven by dollars and cents. Most other ratepayers, they know about social infrastructure. They won't use those words, but they know about what makes their communities tick. It's not the dollars and cents, it's who's willing to stand up and run the local sports club and those sorts of networks. So, yeah, I wouldn't... Yeah, it's a conflicting message, agreed, but I wouldn't get too disheartened by it.
Thank you, that was a great presentation. If you know the people behind the Treasury model, and it sounds like you do, could you put in a plea to include cultural capital in that list of other kinds of capital? Because although we talk about social capital, we're vague, and what we in museums are dealing with is cultural capital and benefits of that return. So maybe if we could get that into the Treasury model, get it back into everybody's thinking.
Sure.
I think one of our problems is that we do have languages around values and we use things like significant projects, but we get no sense of legitimacy with economists who are like, what do archaeologists and museums people know about value? So if we could get cultural capital in there, I think we might have a leg to stand on the chance of being heard.
I'll try. I wouldn't. I think I wouldn't put money on it. I wouldn't put anything on it. I suppose I can hear their responses that they would put cultural capital inside social capital, and so it's a question of language and definitions. Given that their definition of social capital is still fairly vague as well, so Yeah, and I think the opportunity is out there to drive that argument and to drive that definition. Yeah, agreed. I'll talk to them, but who knows? I'll have a good conversation as we always do. But it's good to. What you're suggesting is that we actually continue to try and broaden their perspectives, which is agreed. And it's not just the Treasury people; it's the economist profession as well, because they've got this. This is their jargon: social capital. Bail them up and say, and let's define it.
Yep, David.
Do you think there's any future in stopping or modifying our use of the terms for-profit and not-for-profit? In the light of what you've shown us, I think we might be boxing ourselves into a corner by continuing to be not-for-profit, and when in fact we are for value, for wealth, for investment in the community. And I just take heart from some of the things you've said, that maybe if we stop using the not-for-profit language, then others might also start seeing things in more than just financial terms.
Yeah, that's something totally new thrown at me, and actually it makes a lot of sense. I hadn't thought of that perception. At the risk of generating more jargon, but it does sound like a very useful conversation to have a think about what sort of organisation, how you want to describe your organisation. What are your objectives? What is your contribution? Maybe it's for value, maybe it's for something else, but the not for, there are negative connotations around it. It says what you're not for, but it doesn't actually say what you are for. And it also implies, underneath it implies that profit is necessarily good, whereas actually it depends on what you do with the profit. From my perspective, I don't have a worry about profit being good or bad. It's what you do with the profit that's important.
This is the point, though, that profit's beyond money.
Yes.
So that's
agreed.
the value. So it's actually
Yeah.
what is the definition of profit? I suppose.
Exactly. Yeah. Agreed.
Yep.
That last question brings in the term charitable as well, and how does that fit into the equation?
Yeah, that opens up another equation, another dimension as well. I suppose it reinforces the importance of choosing the language in the terms you want to be described as, and choosing those carefully, so that you are, I suppose in the jargon, displaying your contribution appropriately. So you're sending the right messages, whether they be subliminal or not. So charitable. You need to think about the language and the labels you use, and let's use the ones that you prefer rather than ones that have been imposed by others.
That's all the time we have for questions. So in the sense of circularity, we started on time and we're 5 minutes over time. So we're doing very well. Please join with me in thanking Dr. Nana.